Hello and welcome in Conversation with David Hackett. Joining me today is
Malcolm Lawrence.
Malcolm, introduce yourself and what you're here for today.
Well, it's basically to speak about all the things that I remember during my life, basically, which will include living in Penzance and also on the Isles of Scilly.
Okay, so have you always lived in Penzance?
Not really. Well, yes, I have. But let me get this one right. I lived in Penzance until I was 8 years old. I then moved to the Isles of Scilly to live with an aunt and an uncle. The uncle was the brother of my mother. When we lived in Parkworth Avenue, all the children from miles around used to come to the Princess Mary Recreation Ground, and they had marvellous swings and roundabouts. They had an American there and all sorts of things like that. But one day I walked too close to the swings and I got kicked in the head, or just above the eye, with a boy with hobnail boots, and was taken to the hospital to dress. I've still got the scar today. Of course, Mother thought that I'd had an accident in Trenair. Trenair was being built and the road was being laid just at that point, quite adjacent to the swings, but it wasn't. So.
And what is your memories of moving to Wearitown to live?
We moved to Wearitown. I don't really know the reason why, but it could have been because it got us closer to the sea, because where we were there in Wearitown, you could walk across the road in your swimming trunks and then you actually went swimming straight away. But, I mean, it's a proper little community down there. I mean, there's people still in contact with one another now after all these years. But the one group that I remember specifically were the Belgian fishermen and their families who were evacuated from the continent, you know, when the Germans moved in and one thing and another. But they had the good expertise, because of being fishermen, to look for mines, and they would drag a rope, I presume, or steel hawser between two vessels, and that would bring the mines, cut the wires on the mines and lift them to the surface.
So you was pretty close to the sea then?
Yes, I've always been very close to the sea, until I got married.
So what was the boys forming up into a gang and go-karts?
Well, we used to, we were the Wearitown gang, you know, all the boys of Wearitown, and there was the Newling gang as well. And one day we got the go-karts out and we came down over the hill. I'm trying to think what the hill was called. The Riggin Hill. And we were in the go-kart, probably even too many, they should have been there. And we come herring down over, and we came around the corner and there was a rope totally held by the Newling gang and swept us all off the go-kart. But that was the sort of thing that we do. And it wasn't done maliciously. It was all in play, if you understand what I mean. It's a different attitude they've got today now.
It's a totally different attitude compared to when I was growing up. So the attitude back then, I suppose, was, would you say, more strict or more relaxed?
No, I mean, we were strict in the respect that we respected our elders, if you understand what I mean. You know, we'd no more think about doing anything Well, at mine, at that time, I was only about, what, say about 8 or 10. Well, it wouldn't be as old as then. It was about 7 or 8 anyway, so... But I was being led astray by the older boys.
And easily influence is one of the things that being part of a gang was part of, wasn't it?
That's right, yes, yes.
And if you failed to, I assume, if you failed to do what they told you, you wasn't part of a gang.
Well, it wasn't exactly that. It's just that we just followed them with what they were doing, because it was the accepted thing, But down at Werrytown as well, there was what they classed as a boating pool, and we used to play in that. And scores of times I've fallen in and dragged myself out. But I mean, it's no longer used as a boating pool. It's just a feature. It wasn't even used as what it was for little children to play. It's no longer used for that sort of thing now. It's just there as a feature in the gardens now.
So what is your early recollections of actual school as such?
Well, we went to school over Tallcorn School, which is on the end of the new road, the closest end to Penzance of Newlyn. And quite a good time we had there. I can remember when the King and Queen came down. This would be back in 1942, when they brought the 2 princesses down with them. Now, this would have been the first time that the Princess Elizabeth, as she was then, was the first time she visited Cornwall, and Penzance in particular, and this was before even her coronation, so obviously she was going to become the future queen. But I can remember we had a half-term from school, and I came down, and we were on the road leading between Penzance and Newlyn, and somebody lifted me up, I think, and they put me on a window ledge, because I can remember being up high, looking down into the car as they went by, and I could see the 2 little girls sitting in the back. And it wasn't until afterwards that I realised that they were Princess Margaret and Princess Elizabeth.
And she, Queen Elizabeth, as she is now, has come down to Penzance ever since, really, hasn't she?
Yes. I mean, what her mother and father did was to bring them down, actually to see the fishing fleet, seeing Newlyn. So, I mean, it could have been they were opening something. I just don't know. I was too young to realise that sort of thing,
So, did you often go outside Penzance for any trips when you went to school, do you remember?
We used to go to, one thing I can remember particularly was a Sunday school trip that we went to Carbis Bay on the train. And you had your tea treat bun. I can vividly remember that, but I can't remember anybody around me. All I was interested in was my tea treat bun and being able to go swimming.
I remember when I went on Sunday school and all that, they took me to St Ives Porthminster Beach, and I've always remembered the tea treat buns back then were always big, but nowadays they just seem smaller in size.
Yeah.
So would you agree they've gone smaller in size?
Yeah. I mean, what appalls me now is that some of the bakers don't even make tea tree buns now. And when you go in and ask for a tea tree bun, they don't even know what you're talking about.
You often said you liked your swimming and walking across the road to get to swim.
Yeah.
Was that because I assume there wasn't much traffic then as it is nowadays?
The Western National buses were down the end, the Newlyn side of Werrytown, and all the buses were there, but you didn't have the volume of buses now. You had the first ones going in about 7 o'clock, and then they just came out in drips and drabs like that, because there were other bus stations around. Well, there was a bus station at St Ives, a bus station at Houston, there was another one at Redruth. So it wasn't all in Wherry Town, but I mean they were all, those that started early from Penzance were based at Western National Garage we called it the Regan River. I mean, in those days, and I mean, I go up to 1952, pre-1952, the buses and the trains worked in unison. If the bus was a bit late, the train would wait for them, and vice versa. If the train was a bit late, the bus was wait before they pulled off. Mind, it might have had something to do with, in those days, the Western National Bus Company had drivers who actually drove the buses, so there's good liaison between the buses and the trains.
As you grew older, you said you was travelling to the Scillies.
That was why I specifically remember the King and Queen and the Princesses coming down in 1942, because I moved out to the Scillies in November 1942, and I've got vivid recollections of that sort of thing. But it was a completely different environment over there. Obviously, only about age, it took me a bit of a while to get sort of settled in with things and go to school there. But eventually, I wouldn't say accepted. It was a done thing. All the children were part of all the family. All the friends and everything. You were friend, and all the senior people, you called uncle and auntie, even though you weren't your uncle and auntie.
So it basically felt like one big happy family.
Yes. I mean, I moved over to what was in the 1914-18 war. There was a battalion based on the garrison where I went to live, and there was all this sort of the dungeons were there with the billets for the soldiers and all this sort of thing. But in the meantime, they'd moved to Starcastle Hotel, but it left like a ground level bungalow. The actual roof was level with the ground, and obviously the war was on then, but the bombers used to come in and use the two hills of Sampson as a sighting to come in over the islands. But unfortunately, our bungalow was on the same line of fire as they were, and they would come in firing their machine guns as we went in. And if I was on that flat roof, I had to run like the clappers to go down into this basement. And after this sort of thing happened, my aunt used to make it, I can't remember whether it was tea or coffee, but a drop of spirits was put in for all of us to sort of steady our nerves, as it were.
What was it like to live on Yalsall City?
Oh, lovely. We were one big happy family. Everybody knew everybody else, Progressively, as I sort of settled in, I then obviously started going to Sunday school and church, and then they wanted somebody to pump the organ, and I presume I volunteered or was commandeered to pump the organ. I had some interesting experiences with that. One of our school teachers, none of us children liked it because she was very free with her hand and gave us a clip round the ear when things weren't going right. But she was one of these who liked to promote herself when anybody important came over to the islands, and she would insist on playing the organ, and the organist was pushed to one side. But she was a buster when she played by using all the stops, which meant that there was more air being used. Well, I controlled the air that went into the organ by a lead weight, and there was a line that you keep it, and you would keep it below that line to make sure there was air in the organ. But we called her Lizzie Rogers, Lizzie. When Lizzie was playing, I would get that lead weight just below the level of that line, And when all the stops were pulled out, the organ would go. Of course, I was tickled pink with that. You did that on purpose, Malcolm. You did that. I'm sorry, miss. It was when you pulled all the stops out, I couldn't keep up with the organ you were trying to pull out from the organ, the area you were trying to pull out of the organ. But all the children were delighted when I did this to her. It wasn't done maliciously. It was sort of, I'm in control there. You know, I control what you...
So you would call yourself a joker as you was growing up then? A comedian that liked to...
Well, always up to mischief, I suppose. Well, all us children were, you know.
Yeah. So how much was you paid to pump the organ?
Oh, that. I had a shilling for services and half a crown for weddings. So, I mean, that was quite good, you know, we felt it. But then, having said that, you know, in those days, children were expected to do something for their pocket money. I know I used to take cans of paraffin of the people who lived around, because in those days, a lot of people used paraffin stoves and things like that. And I was paid 6p a can to go down to the quay and pick up these cans of paraffin. I used to put a yoke thing on my shoulders and tie the rope to that, and then the handle, so I took the weight on my shoulders. But I could take 5 maximum cans in that wheelbarrow, so that was half a crown a week I could earn from that, and I thought I was, you know, in easy street with that. I mean, to be paid 6p for a can. I mean, obviously the people were quite pleased that I did it for them, but I mean, to save them sort of, they would have had, it was only about, what, say, quarter to half a mile to go for this, but it meant that they didn't have the drudgery of doing that, you know.
I know what you mean. You did their work, basically, instead of them doing it. Yes,
and got paid for it, and that gave me mine. I didn't used to spend it unnecessarily. I used to put into national savings stamps. You know, so that was, to me, when I was putting money into the national savings, it was money that I'd earned, and it wasn't given to me just as pocket money, if you understand what I mean. You know?
You kept your money just to say, this is what I've earned.
That's right. I mean, I used to keep out, say, a penny or 2p for pictures or something like that, you know, but that was all. Other than that, I just used to go in for savings.
So, I assume the war was still on when you went over to the Sinnies?
Oh, yes. I mean, over there we had a squadron of Hurricanes based on the aerodrome, and we had Sunderlands that were floating anchored in the pool, which is the harbour where all the boats and that were. And the Hurricanes were there mainly because of these fighters coming in and flying like that. But it was quite amusing, really, because the pilots used to dare one another to fly between the masts of the Solonian. And one day, I don't know why we'd gone over to St Martin's for a day or something, and I was watching the Hurricane come down between the masts of the Solonian, and suddenly it disappeared. And when we got back to St Mary's, the foremast of the Solonian was snapped right off halfway down, and the Hurricane apparently had hit this and just gone straight into the sea. But it seemed funny to be on St Martin to see this. I mean, I would say the ship would have been something like about, say 20 or 25 miles away, but you could see it was quite a nice clear day, so you could see everything went on.
And I assume this was the original Solonian, not Solonian?
No, this was the original Solonian, that's right, yeah. She was a stuggy boat. I mean, I used to go on it quite often, and my aunt used to make me bacon sandwiches to eat over there. And I used to, because I mean, obviously, but then I was quite a good sailor, and I'd have the spew pans I suppose. I think that's a polite way of calling it. And I'd be handing these around to everybody and eating my sandwich at the same time and saying, why is everybody being sick around me? So... Well, that Silonian one, she was there. Well, at that time, we had a small, there was a small ship that was employed to ease the burden on the Silonian, and she used to carry about 25 passengers to help, the burden for day trips and things like that, And she was called the Lady of the Isles, I can remember that, But she was a miniature version of the Silonian.
So a smaller scale.
That's right, yeah.
And do you remember how much it cost back then, or was it just one of those things that got paid for you and you don't remember?
I don't think about that. All I knew was my ticket was paid for.
So how long was you over on the Scillies for?
Well, I lived on the Scillies until I was about 14. But there's a few stories to do with the Scillies. The Sunderlands were there specifically to guard the entrance to the English Channel. And they had bombs, obviously, and they would dive and bomb the submarines were there to clear the submarines. But at one time, there was a walrus amphibian that came down. I think it was probably come down for a friendly trip, as I put it in that way. And there was a group on this, and they took off from the roads, which is a strip of man between St Mary's and Trescoes, and a gust of wind caught them, and it pushed them over on their side, and it broke a float on the walrus amphibian, and that was on the beach there for a long time, waiting until they were able to acquire a float. I assume this was done unobtrusively, so they wouldn't get into trouble, because I assume this being a jaunty from what they call these things, they were entertaining different ones on flying trips.
What was it about the Liberator bomber and the prospect for ringmaking?
I was actually coming home from school, and Star Castle Hotel is on the Garrison, which is a tall point of the islands. And I saw this Liberator coming down with one of its wheels hanging down, and it circled around and circled around. And it was only a small aerodrome. But anyway, I saw it crash land in the aerodrome and then come down through and went through the hedges of Partingcarn Farm. And of course, instead of going home, I heard off, the same as all of us children, to hear this, see what this Liberator was all about and what was like. And Perspex was one of those things in those days. They were like a hardened plastic for the windows of the aircraft. And we were all clamouring to try and get pieces of Perspex. And the policeman was there trying to stop us. And while two or three was attracting his attention on one side, the others were around the other side pinching the Perspex. But there were scores of Perspex ring going around after that where he made all these.
So you still went to school over in the Isles or something?
Oh, yes. Oh, we were actually privileged. A colleague of mine who was in school over with me, we were privileged to have our education there because we had a top-rate education, but it also taught us to be very self-confident, because obviously a lot of prominent people would come over there on holidays, and we just accepted them. It wasn't there was no airs and graces with them. You know, they were pleased that we accepted them as themselves and not the position they held in the country. I can remember going over there a long time after I left, and I took a mini coach over for something to do with the health service. That's another story. And the lady running, or one of the ladies within the paper shop, came running out when she saw me. She obviously saw me going down to the Stonian, because I had to go down to pick up this mini coach because I was taking the chief executives of the regional health authorities who were having a conference there. And she leapt out into the road and I had to stop the bus. And I said, look, we're holding the... Don't matter about the other traffic. She said, I want to find out what you're doing. I want, they're picking my brain spaces to know why I was there. But time was no object. It was another day tomorrow as far as they were concerned over there.
How old was you when you came back to the mainland?
Oh, I was about 14. But, I mean, the thought was we had cinemas there once a week and dancing once a month. And when you're in your teens, that wasn't enough life as far as you were concerned. I can. There's lots of things about the Isles of Scilly I can remember. I mean, one in particular, my uncle was a keeper on the Bishop Rock Lighthouse, and the craze was that we all made these wooden windmills to fly in the air. And anyway, Uncle Bert made me this magnificent windmill. Was about 6 or 8 inches in diameter, and it was the envy of all the children. And I used to stand on the top of the hill on the level with Starcastle Hotel, and he was principal keeper on the Bishop Rock, and I'd hold this up so that he could see me with it. And he used to say that, that he could see me when I was up there doing this. So it gave him an added interest being stuck on the lighthouse like that.
Did you actually go to that lighthouse then?
I've been around it, but never been on that one. I have been on various lighthouses, but that one, because it was so isolated, the keepers had to go up over a sling. They would put their foot in a loop of a rope and be pulled up by a pulley and then onto the landing stage, and then the next one would put his foot in a loop and then be let down. And it was a month on and 2 months ashore. In other words, 4 weeks on and then 8 weeks off, and that was the same ritual that went on.
Would you have liked to do that as a job?
Not particularly, no. It wasn't anything to appeal to me. I wasn't anything for that. I wasn't adventurous enough not to sort of try and climb up, that sort of thing, yeah. I was all right on board a boat and things like that, but that to me was a bit too precarious for me, timid little lad that I was.
Malcolm, carrying on about the theme of the Scillies, what else do you remember about the Scillies?
Oh, I can remember, because the war was still on. We used to have time off from school to pick up the new potatoes, because obviously in those days, at wartime, it was dig for victory, and new potatoes were the first crop of potatoes in the country, because the Scillies were so nicely situated. And I can remember one time in particular, we were picking up potatoes, and I came across, when the potatoes are lifted, you then got the original one there, that all the shoots came off to grow the new potatoes, and there was this lovely squelchy big potato, and I can remember standing up, and the chap that was with me, he was in the choir with me at the church, and I can remember that he was down the far end, but Nicky Christopher, the boss, was standing between us, but he was bent down out of line of fire, and I fired this potato at Mike, expecting to hit Mike, but instead of that, Nicky Christopher stood up and I caught him on the back of the neck. I quickly got down and pretended I didn't know nothing about it.
What did they discover in the end? It was you?
I don't know, I can't remember. All I know was I kept my head down as if I was too busy. That was the sort of thing, that we got up to. They weren't malicious, if you understand what I mean,
Fun-hearted.
Yes.
So, what else do you remember then about the Sillies in particular?
After the organ was electrified, they decided they'd like to keep me in the church. And there was a man's choir and a ladies' choir and a girls' choir, but they didn't have a boys' choir. So they started a boys' choir. And Mike Hicks, I just previously spoke of, he later became the chairman of the Isles of Scilly Steamship Company. He was roped in to be with me, so we started the boys' choir. That was quite amusing because obviously youngsters, we were sort of messing around. A new vicar arrived, and I can always remember his sermon, and he was saying, "I am a dying man, ye are dying people." That was his text, and I can remember crouching thinking, I'm too young to die. But he stood up, and his chest came out and he spoke like this. And when you're that tender age, that sort of thing sticks in your mind forever. We were chattering amongst ourselves, and in the end, he was preaching his sermon, and he stopped in mid-flow and he said, "When you boys have stopped," he said, stop chattering, he said, "perhaps I can get on with my sermon."
Can I ask, are you a Methodist?
Well, actually, funny enough, I've been christened a Methodist and also Church of England.
So you grew up with both denominations?
No, before I moved over to the Isles of Scilly, I was christened in Richmond Chapel. And after moving to the Isles of Scilly, I was going for confirmation, and of course they didn't know the background, so the vicar decided, and Mike Hicks was the same, he hadn't been christened, and we were both christened Church of England then, so that we were able to go for confirmation. And I can remember going for confirmation, we went in an open boat over to Tresco, and it was quite choppy because I can remember sitting in the bow of this boat and looking down, and the boat was about a good 10 feet below me, and I was up in the air looking down at this, but it was really choppy. But I was christened by the Dr. Hunkin, who was the Bishop of Truro at the time, and he was quite friendly with Major Dorian Smith, and used to spend a lot of time in the Isles of Scilly, so he was no stranger to us.
Why did you decide to leave the island then, after many years you said?
I mean, when you're in your sort of early teens, I'm in pictures once a week and dance once a month. Not that I love my pictures, but dancing I wasn't bothered much about. But I knew that I would start getting interested in it, so I decided that I think activities are more on the mainland in the Isles of Scilly. So that was why I decided to come over.
And you came back by Salonian again to the mainland?
Yes.
Was this the same Salonian you came across to the Scillies?
Saying about the Salonian again, I know when I was 14, I decided that I wanted to go join the Navy as a boy sailor. And you had to come over to HMS Raleigh to take exams and things. But the day that I was due to come over, the weather was so rough that only people with a general purpose to come over to the mainland were allowed to travel, and no women were allowed to travel. But I can remember it taking us 5.5 hours of struggling across these heavy mountainous seas to get over to the mainland. But when I got to HMS Raleigh, the first thing they did was tested my eyes. And the person that tested my eyes said, he said, no good. He said, you can't join the Navy, you've got bad eyesight. Now, I didn't know until that time I had bad eyesight. What does annoy me now is to see sailors with spectacles on. But then that's another story.
So discrimination, you would say?
Well, yes. I got my own back a bit later on.
So what did you do when you first came back from the Isles of Scilly?
Oh, when I came back, I got a job as an errand boy. This was actually was for a fish shop, which had a fish and chip shop adjacent to it, and you deliver all the wet fish supplies around the town. You had a carrier bike, with a square basket on the front, delivering that. But I mean, obviously you had music events on the radio, and the catchy tunes, all the errand boys were the same, and they'd go around whistling the catchy tunes, and you were all the same, whistling like that, But one item in particular I remember about that was there was a lady who lived just around the corner, and just as the shop was closing, she would come around for 6 penny worth of cat wing for ling wings for a cat. Now this was after we'd iced all the fish down and was ready to go. One of us had to sort of drag the fish out to cut these wings off, and there was a passageway running between the wet fish and the fish and chip shop, and the mate that I was there working with, John, he was in this, and I could hear what he was saying, but this lady couldn't hear what he was saying. And he said, tell her what you think of her. Now, go on, tell her what you think of her. And I was trying to keep a straight face and be serious about it, but he kept on about this, and he was rolling around with laughter in the corridor.
So, how many years did you do that job for?
Oh, that would have been probably about a couple of years, I suppose. And then, of course, National Service came along.
Because that National Health Service came out in 1948?
1948, yeah. That's another level of my life, or another section of my life, as it were. That's a completely different thing altogether. But I was determined that I was not going to go in as a foot soldier after the elements of the failing the eye test. And I tried for the RAF, and the same thing happened again. Bad eyesight found. So I then went in the Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers. It's a corps as opposed to an infantry regiment. No way was I going to be a foot slogger. But that was some very interesting stories to that as well, really good.
And you met your wife when, in this time?
Oh no, this was after I'd done 3 years in the Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineering.
Did you have to go away for that?
Yeah, I was in Malaya for those 3 years, for the best part of them. That was some interesting time. I was attached to the 1st 7th Gurkha Rifles, and that was really interesting because one of them actually, when he was on leave, made a cookery for me and presented to me, full official presentation and that. And I said to the lads that I was with, well, there was 5 of us vehicle mechanics there, and I said, this should have been to all of us. And he said, no. Remember what you said to them when you were there? I said, no, I don't remember that. He said, you told him, he said, no paperwork if you have a bang. He said, come to me after the workshop's closed. And hammer, knock out the bumps and scrapes, bit of khaki paint or so. But I mean, I presume by that, they thought so highly of me that it was worthy. It just showed how well I was respected, well, in their eyes, So it was a very interesting posting. We had Major Bond, who was Bond of Brook Bonds Tea was a retired general, and he came with an honorary rank of major for the MT section. There was some marvellous experiences with that.
So you have always been respected in any job you entailed in?
I think probably, but I think it was because I was always willing to be helpful, if you understand what I mean. Nothing was too much trouble. I always went out of my way to help anybody.
So you said about getting involved with the National Health Service, as everyone associated it. They didn't abbreviate it as they do now, but you got involved.
Well, when I came out the service, there was a story I've just missed out on. It don't matter about that.
We can go back to that in a minute.
People say about unemployment. There was a massive unemployment in those days, and jobs were few and far between. But my father used to go to a certain pub in the town for a hard drink or a couple of drinks in the evening, and the sister tutor with her partner used to go to this pub and told father about this job that was going in the hospital. They wanted a driver engineer who could weld. Well, part of my job in Ramey was to do welding, and they wanted a welder to help the fitter to weld up hoppers to put the coal in to feed the boilers. Anyway, that was quite interesting because there was 4 of us shortlisted for interview, and I was the only one who'd driven the column change, and I taught the others how to drive with the column change, and none of them knew what to do. It was just a certain way you got to hold the wheel with the column change, and of course I got elected. But the health service in those days was only 7 years old, so there was no demarcation lines.
So it was in its infancy as such.
Well, yes, very much so. And everybody pulled together. If there was a job to do, no matter what it was, you were asked to help. And it was really interesting in those days. Really, really interesting.
Did it change the way the health service was as it was during the war to,
Not really, because, in those days, when I started in the health service, there was a house committee composed of sort of prominent people in the town, but these were sort of the chairman of the gas board and that type of thing, at that level, and they sort of got together to actually run the hospital as such, In other words, this harked back to when the hospital ran with a house committee. So, basically, the hospital was run by 5 people. That was the 2 consultants, or 3 consultants, matron, head porter, and the hospital secretary.
And your role within this was?
I was a driver engineer, I progressed over the years, and I became a porter and services manager, which is a highfalutin name really. But at that level, some were called bursars, some were called beagles. It was like you're in control of everything that happens. You have a key to all the doors. Nothing is sacrosanct. But a really interesting role.
So this was it's not was West Cornwall back then. Was
No, this was actually West Cornwall Hospital then.
But so it was known as West Cornwall. It wasn't.
Yes, known as West Cornwall Hospital.
Because what was the name of West Cornwall Hospital before? It was.
Well, no, in those days it was there was Redruth Hospital, Cornwall Redruth Hospital. That's been gone now, and there's also City Hospital at Truro. There was Menag Hospital in Helston. That was a geriatric hospital. There was Edward Hayne at St Ives. There was Poulter Hospital, which was a ladies' geriatric hospital at Haymore. And there was Belitho Hospital, which was a convalescent hospital. It was adjacent to the heady thoracic unit, they were mainly TB patients. And there was 25 patients there sitting. There was sort of an open plan huts where the patients were sitting, so they had plenty of fresh air, because it was fresh air they were all interested in, and that was very, very interesting, but to come down to what it is now, where there's no patients there anymore, but there is mental associated personnel there working. But when I actually came home and retired, I knew that they were hell-bent on selling that as going to Conservative Hotel. But having been in the health service so long, I knew the devious ways that they were getting on. And they'd bought every expensive piece of fixtures and fittings to do that out. And I knew full well that what they had in mind was to sell that off. So I was a bit annoyed about that. So I went to a board meeting and said that I'd lie down in the front gate and refuse anything to be moved in or out, that they wouldn't sell it off. And I'm quite pleased now that all these different mental health services are being run from Belitho. But
because they still is that the central location for the mental health service in Cornwall then?
It's Cornwall Partnership Trust. No, Cornwall Partnership Trust runs all the mental health. The Cornwall Partnership Foundation Trust, and it's all to do with the mental health and that type of thing, eventually this will be joined in very closely with social services.
So Cornwall Council will be taking control of it as such?
No, I don't think it will have to be a united thing. This was proposed in April 1972, this amalgamation of services.
And it's now 2013.
Well, yes. Over a long period of time, they were always, if a cost came to a patient, social services would say, that's nothing to do with us, the NHS. And if it was something to do with social services, the health service would say, no, that's nothing to do with us, the social services. So while this squabbling was going on over many, many years, it just wasn't getting on. I'm quite pleased with the way things are going at the moment, because this total amalgamation is supposed to be happening by April of 2018.
So that's 4 years, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So you were active in the NHS, and also you had other roles as well to lead in the Penzance area.
Well, yes, I when I retired, I became, because we'd watched the town go down and down and down. We spent a lot of time there. Somebody said to me many years ago, because I was looking to improve, because my wife was quite happy for me to stay as a driver engineer, but I know there was a very senior person in the health service was surprised to find I still worked at West Cornwall Hospital. Oh, he said, you're still here. Well, that gave me the impetus to get on, you know. And I took a personal interest with what was happening in the health service, specifically to do with Cornwall. And I knew that Cornwall was financially deprived by millions and millions of pounds. And I drew this attention of our local MP. But it's getting technical now. Because of parliamentary protocol, they were not able to unite as all the MPs for Cornwall and speak up as them. So that annoyed me, but you know, I just kept dripping away and dripping away. I mean, there are a lot of things, because of my background, have improved in health service. Don't get me wrong, there is a lot of good work being done. But unfortunately, where anything goes wrong, this is cannon fodder for the media. And I liken Tralis to Northern Ireland. Bullets and blood are headline news. But all the good things, like the people in Northern Ireland, of which I know a lot of, because I used to go over there in my work in the health service, all the friendliness and helpfulness, nothing ever gets written about. So, you know, that's how it goes.
And you then got involved with, I believe, Penzance Town Council?
Yeah, because of watching the town go down, down and down, there came a by-election up, and I said to Margaret, that's my wife, you know, do you mind if I go for it? She said, why ask me? She said, I know full well you're going to go for it. And I went for it, and I had 2/3 of the vote out of 3 nominees. But I forgot people remembered me from when I worked at West Cornwall Hospital. And I mean, there was one lady said to me another time when I was canvassing, don't bother to come to, you know, canvass me. I can remember you from old. She said, don't waste your time. You know, it was that sort of thing, you know, so... Yeah.
So how many years was you on the actual council?
16 years. I was so despondent about the way things were going. The Cornwall Council were pushing so much on the town councils and parish councils to do this work. What annoyed me was they'd already received the money to run these services, and then they expected town and parish councils to run them. And I just got a bit despondent, really. And like this, we said about the Isles of Scilly link. Well, Cornwall Council had a privileged setup, for want of a better word, with selected staff trying to improve this link. And because of my association with the Isles of Scilly, I accosted them when they came back from a meeting on the Isles of Scilly, and because I was very friendly with the county councillor, because I'm friendly with all of them at that point, I attend more county council meetings and councillors themselves. And I said to Graham Hicks, who was the portfolio holder for the Island League then, I said, look, I said, it's about time. I said that the town council got involved. So he said, what do you mean? I said, we've never been involved at all. I said, it's important the town council gets involved. And he turned around on these 2 highfalutin people. He said, that's the town councillor talking. He said, I want a meeting with town council. And sure enough, we had a meeting within about 10 days to a fortnight. And that was how the actual thing is going on now, you know, rolling on now.
And then the Older People's Forum came along. Was that through Penwith Council, or was that...
No, that's nothing. It was only because it was originally Penwith Seniors Forum. And this was because Chris Kinninan, who was a district councillor and also a county councillor, very much looking after the interests of older people. And that was when the forum was formed. That was in actual fact, it was because of that that Penwith radio station was set up. It was because of we felt, well, Chris Caninian more than anybody felt, it was important to get an amalgamation of all the community, both young and old, to form some sort of liaison between one another. And that was when Penwith Community Radio was started.
And your role in this organisation was?
Well, I suppose I've always been on the committee of it, but I fully appreciated what this radio station could do. So I've actually been involved right from the inception of the radio station, and it's been really marvellous. I know we've lurched from one financial crisis to another and things like that, but we're getting there. And the number of volunteers, I can't believe it, because we met up after 12 months starting, and I didn't recognise, I would say a good 90% of them, but these were all youngsters and volunteers, all doing their own little bit for the radio station. And I mean, we've got a lot of what I call students down learning the art of presentation and media, because they're hoping to get to the media when they leave school and things like that. So, I mean, there's the radio station, a little goldmine for education for the youngsters.
So if you was to leave a lasting memory in everyone's mind, what would it be?
My lasting memory?
Yeah, if you want people to remember you by, what would you like them to remember you by?
I don't know, because a certain person in my life said that you're going to die a very lonely man. So I said, what do you mean? She said, well, you're always falling out with people and telling people off. So I said, there are always people, paid officers, who are paid by you and me. And I said, 3 councillors were discussing this, and one said to the other, do you know, he's going to have the biggest funeral going. And the third one said, yes, somebody we delegated lift up the lid to make sure his that's gone. So, you know, that's how things.
So that's the sort of humour that you would have shown when you was younger as well.
Yes.
So in a sense, they do your sort of humour back on you.
Yeah, it is. It's true. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I had some marvellous times on council. You know, I wouldn't. I didn't join the Penwith and Cornwall Twinning Committee because I thought that we having ratepayers' money to pay us for trips over to Cornwall. Well, when I found we paid for ourselves, I then joined that committee. You understand what I mean? Mm. It's the same as Penley House and Gardens. I've been on that practically the whole of the time that I was a councillor. I've now I finished with council. I'm now friends of Penley, but I got all that knowledge that I had previously that I can still use that as a friend.
Thank you very much, Malcolm, for coming in today.
Thank you.
Thank you.